Hello, welcome back. Okay, this is part three of our discussion of the art of ancient civilizations. We just finished wrapping up ancient Egypt. We talked about the Old Kingdom, a little bit about the Middle Kingdom, and some focus on the New Kingdom and the Amarna period. And now I'm going to talk about, at the same time, we're going to go back in time a little bit and talk about 3000 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia. The civilizations in ancient Mesopotamia developed roughly about the same time as in ancient Greece or ancient Egypt. And so we kind of start from about the same time period. But as you may remember from my initial discussion in part one, a lot of this is about a contrast between Egypt and Mesopotamia. In Egypt, because of the geography, because they were unified by one river and surrounded by deserts and therefore mostly free from invasion from outside people, Egypt was mostly a civilization of continuity, unity, and timelessness. And the art very much reflected that, both because of their funerary ideas, because the Egyptians were interested in art that was about an eternal afterlife, but also because Egypt was a culture in which timelessness uh, and perpetuity was an important concept, was a value. In Mesopotamia, we see a very different kind of world where it's a much more spread out region between two rivers and much more porous, where outside people can come in all the time. And also because it's not unified, it's made up of city states and they're constantly fighting with each other, rivals for power. Sometimes one city state is on top, sometimes another, and this leads to a world with um, a lot more anxiety, a lot more activity, and it leads to a very different kind of art. One of the things it does is it leads to a much greater variety of art. We see a lot of different kinds of styles in Egyptian art. Egyptian art was dominated by certain kinds of conventions that we just saw, um, kind of like solidified and then used over and over again. And in Mesopotamian art, we see a lot of different conventions, conventions abandoned, conventions restarted. And another thing that's different is just in Mesopotamian art, the there was a lot less interest in funerary and in the idea of timelessness, and a lot more interest in piety, in artwork reflecting the idea of man's position in the world and man's essential subservient helplessness um, beneath the gods. And you'll see that as we talk about on a couple of pieces, such as this first piece, the Standard of right here, which is it's basically a box, and the most important thing about this box is that it has two sides. One side being a side that describes the peace and one that describes war. And the war side, this side right here, we see soldiers, we see them defeating enemies, riding chariots. And then on the other side, we have the peace side where we see a banquet and kind of a procession leading up to the banquet. And the banquet and the procession are also a means of showing all the good things, all the food and all the other good things that come from peaceful times, that people are allowed to produce all kinds of goods and wealth and prosper with lots of food. And so this is a very different kind of feel from Egyptian art. And then down here we have these votive statues, which are little statuettes that may be of gods or may be of kind of praying priest figures, or possibly even a little bit of both. Both kind of praying figures, but also representing the gods that they are praying to. One of the things that we see a lot of in Mesopotamian art is the idea of figures looking upward, looking skyward, and with really large eyes. The prevailing theory about this kind of large-eyed look is the idea of keeping your eye on the divine, and making sure that you're never looking away. You're staying true to the path. Um, so Mesopotamian, I should go back one just for a second. So Mesopotamian art begins with the Sumerian, and this is a work of Sumerian art here, and actually all three of these are Sumerian works of art. And the Sumerians were the first people to live in Mesopotamia, and they lived primarily in the southern part of Mesopotamia, what would be the southern part of Iraq today. And but there were new people coming into Mesopotamia all the time, and soon some of those new people began to prosper and to conquer other people until we get to the Acadians, where the Acadians actually conquered all of Mesopotamia and were the first sort of almost an empire in Mesopotamia, conquering the other old Sumerian city-states. And the Acadians were outside people. They spoke a Semitic language, something similar to Hebrew, and they dominated for a couple of hundred years in Mesopotamia. This piece right here, is a work of Akkadian art. It's called the Victory Stele of Naram-Sin, and it shows some of those same ideas that we were talking about: an obsession with war and peace, an obsession with conflict, also an obsession with man's place in the world. Um, you may be wondering, well, what is a stele? A stele just means a stone marker. And you may be wondering, well, what is this Victory Stele of Naram-Sin? Well, it's a stone that is set up in a place to, and usually it's a place near where a battle occurred to kind of represent a certain moment. In this case, it's basically for Naram-Sin to say, there was a battle here and I won. I defeated my enemies. I am now the most powerful king in the world. And that's what he's basically showing here. Also, note that we see the use of a change of scale to create hierarchy, so that Naram-Sin himself is highest on the page, but also he's the biggest. He's practically a giant compared to some of his enemies. Also note that this is an example of relief sculpture, like we pointed out with the Palette of Namur, but it's it's a little bit deeper. Even though it's still low relief, it's a deeper kind of a relief than what we saw on the Palette of Namur. So this is both a battle, but it's also him climbing a mountain. So it's also kind of a symbol of his proximity to heaven. We have these three stars at the top that probably represent his gods looking out for him. Over on the other side, we have a very different work, but related. After the Acadians and after their kingdom/empire crumbled, we had a resurgence of Sumerian culture, and we had this new kind of kingdom called the Neo-Sumerians, where the old Sumerian city-states um, reasserted themselves under this leadership of this one particular king, Judea, and he established this Neo-Sumerian empire, and he made these little these figurine statuettes that were meant to be put all over his kingdom. So they're kind of like steles in that they're markers, but not so much markers of war, but more a marker of peace, saying that we now, this culture is now running things. And another particularly Mesopotamian aspect of this piece is the fact that it has writing on it, and the writing is actually law code. And this is something we'll see again. So this piece, this Neo-Sumerian piece, shows in some ways a very Mesopotamian feel, but it also shows some influence from Egypt. Notice that it's got this block-like sitting structure, very similar to Egyptian art, and where the original block of stone is still quite visible. The geometry of that block is visible. But then there are other Mesopotamian features, such as that the anatomy is kind of a little bit stylized in a kind of caricaturish way rather than stylized in the Egyptian proportions and Egyptian conventions, and that the face has a lot more character and expression, and is once again kind of with the features a little bit over exaggerated in kind of a caricaturesque sort of way. Also notice that the head is looking up with the eyes large. Um, and then on top of that, like I said, the writing, which is the law code on the statue, all of those are very Mesopotamian elements. And we can see that same quality in this Babylonian stele, this here is the Code of Hammurabi. The Babylonians were another Mesopotamian culture inheriting from the old Sumerians, and they emerged after the Neo-Sumerian Empire as the dominant force in Mesopotamia. And like the Neo-Sumerians, it was the law that was one of the most important things about the way they organized the empire, having a common set of law throughout the empire. And so this is a stele that shows Hammurabi and his god um, on top, but the most important part is all of this down below, where it's a list of the full law code of Hammurabi. The top part of it, like I said, shows the king plus his god, and the king is receiving the law from his god. Um, and one of the interesting things is that the god is quite large compared to Hammurabi, right? If he stood, he would be twice his size, or almost. But right now, because the god is seated, they're looking almost eye to eye, which would be something that we would never see in Egyptian art. So in this work, we see both the importance of piety in in that kind of like a sense of a relationship with your God, of looking to your God, the importance of piety in Mesopotamian art, but at the same time, the importance of the individual, especially the importance of the military hero um, and the lawbringer as an individual. So we see both that tension between those things, and that kind of tension wouldn't have existed in Egyptian art. Okay, ends my discussion about Mesopotamian art. Next, we'll be talking about the Axial Age, which is the transition from the ancient world to the classical world. All right, thank you.